I never thought that day would change my life. It started as just another regular day, with the cold atmosphere of winter hanging over the city. Snow fell gently, covering everything in a layer of white. But it was in this very air that the truth about a girl's death, her identity unknown, would slowly begin to reveal itself. The restaurant had been closed for many years. The name, the Silver Plate, seemed like a distant memory, forgotten in the passing years. But a few people still recalled it as a part of a painful past. I wasn't the only one curious about the place, but after hearing a strange story about an incident there, I decided not to let it go. It was my job, investigating, reporting, and bringing untold stories to the public. I was a journalist, but even I couldn't foresee what I was about to face. With my camera in hand and a sense of anticipation, I stood before the old restaurant's door, the paint peeling off, the frame rusted. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating, cold as if time had stopped. The dim light from the dirty windows wasn't enough to illuminate the entire room. The tables and chairs were abandoned, covered in dust, each piece carrying the weight of time. I cautiously stepped inside, each footstep echoing off the decaying walls. There was no one here, and that made the air feel even heavier. I raised my camera and began to take the first few pictures, trying to capture the desolation of the place. But there was something wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from the shadows. Suddenly, I heard a sound. Something creaked softly in the darkness, causing me to jump. I turned, and that's when I saw it. A freezer standing still in the corner of the room. There was nothing particularly remarkable about it, but something about it unsettled me. An old freezer, darkened with age, seemingly unused for a long time. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to it. I walked over, and when I opened the door, a blast of cold air hit me, sending a shiver down my spine. I looked inside, and then I saw it. A corpse. A girl, still perfectly preserved, as though she was sleeping. But the moment I laid eyes on her, I knew she was no longer alive. The chill from the corpse seemed to stop time itself. I stood frozen, unable to speak. The girl lay there, in old, faded clothes, her long hair disheveled, her eyes closed, her lips pressed tight, as though enduring something terrible. What was even more terrifying was that no one knew who she was. I immediately took out my phone and called the police, just as puzzled when they found that the freezer had been locked and no one had the key. The restaurant had no security cameras, and it had been abandoned for years. It was a huge mystery. I stood there, next to the body of the girl, unable to take my eyes off her face. She seemed like a ghost, left in a cold, empty world, anonymous. But the questions kept weighing on my mind. Who was she? Why was she in a restaurant that had been closed for so long? And who had done this? There were no answers, only an eerie silence. The investigation had just begun, and I had the feeling this story would take me to places darker than I could have imagined. The feeling that I had opened a door that I wouldn't be able to close slowly began to consume me. The story of the girl in the freezer had opened up a door that I couldn't shut again. When the police arrived, everything turned into chaos. Patrol cars with flashing lights filled the street, and officers rushed into the abandoned restaurant. I stepped back, trying to stay out of their way, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread gnawing at me as I looked at the girl's body lying lifelessly in the freezer. I couldn't stop thinking about the vacant expression on her face. She was just a girl, Someone who had once lived, and now she was trapped in the cold, forgotten by everyone. The officers began taking control of the situation, sealing off the area and starting their initial investigation. I stood silently as they checked the premises, examining every inch of the restaurant. I overheard them discussing the situation, trying to piece together the few clues they had. "There's no sign of forced entry," one of the officers said as he checked the front door. "It looks like it was locked from the inside." "So how did she get in?" another officer questioned. "And why the freezer? It's bizarre." I watched them work, feeling both disconnected and deeply immersed in the mystery. This wasn't just a regular case. Something about it felt wrong. The girl in the freezer wasn't just another victim. The cold, silent atmosphere of the place whispered that this was something darker. The officers continued their investigation, but there was no progress. No fingerprints, no identification, nothing to tell them who she was or why she was there. The freezer was locked from the inside, but they couldn't find the key. It was as though the entire place had been erased, and this girl had been left behind for a reason no one understood. I couldn't stand just watching anymore. I had to find something. I had to know more. I took out my phone and began searching through the news archives for any information related to the restaurant. The Silver Plate had been a well-known spot years ago, but it had closed down without any real explanation. It was an oddity in itself. Why did a thriving business just shut its doors one day and disappear into nothing? The building had been left to decay, forgotten by most people, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that it had more to do with this girl's death than I could ever imagine. I left the scene for a while, walking through the streets nearby, my mind racing with questions. Why had no one mentioned the girl? Why was she alone in this place? I needed answers, so I began talking to people who might know about the restaurant. The people who had worked there before it closed down. If I could find a connection, I might be able to uncover the truth. At a nearby coffee shop, I spoke with a man who had worked as a chef at the Silver Plate before it went under. He had worked there for years, but when I brought up the subject of the girl, he gave me an uneasy look and shook his head. "I don't know anything about that," he said, his voice flat. "There were a lot of weird things happening at the restaurant, but I never saw her. She must have been one of the late-night workers." I pressed him, trying to get more out of him. "Did you ever see a girl like her? Maybe someone new or someone out of place?" The man stared into his coffee, a look of discomfort crossing his face. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "She was different. She worked late, always alone. Didn't talk to anyone. She'd just come in, do her job, and leave. I don't know much about her, and honestly, we all tried to stay out of her way. She was a quiet one. There were rumors about her, strange things, but no one really bothered her." Rumors. That was the word I had been waiting for. There was something about this girl, something more than just a simple case of a girl who worked in a restaurant and was found dead in a freezer. There had to be more. I pressed him further. "Do you remember anything odd about the place? Anything that stands out?" The chef hesitated, before finally responding, his voice barely above a whisper. "There were some nights when we heard noises, like whispers or scratching sounds. The walls, the floorboards, it sounded like something was moving inside the walls. Some of us thought it was rats, but it didn't feel like that. Some of the other staff said it was the place, haunted maybe, I don't know. But I never heard anything about that girl being involved in anything like that." A chill ran down my spine. Haunted. Could the girl's presence here be tied to something supernatural? It felt ridiculous to even consider, but there was no other explanation that made sense. The more I dug, the more I felt like I was falling deeper into a hole with no way out. The night came quickly, and I found myself walking back to the restaurant. I couldn't get the image of the girl's lifeless body out of my mind. Shadow, move inside. I quickly turned away, dismissing it as my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I returned the next day, determined to find something, anything, that could explain what had happened. The police had left, but the scene still felt heavy with the memory of the night before. I walked around the building, carefully inspecting the windows, the doors, and any other possible entry points. My instincts told me that there was something here, something hidden just below the surface. And then I found it. A small, almost hidden door in the back of the building. It was partially ajar. The door led into a narrow corridor that I hadn't noticed before. It seemed old, the wood creaking under my feet, but as I walked further, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. At the end of the corridor was a small room, its walls covered in strange symbols, and in the middle of the room there was a large, empty freezer, almost identical to the one in which the girl had been found. My heart raced as I stepped closer to the freezer. What was this room? Why was it hidden from sight? I didn't know what I was about to uncover, but I could feel it in my bones. This was bigger than I had ever imagined. And now I was in too deep to turn back. The discovery of the hidden room sent a shockwave of unease through me. The symbols on the walls were unlike anything I had ever seen before. Unfamiliar and ancient, drawn in what appeared to be a mix of ash and dried blood. As I stepped further into the room, the air grew colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My breath came out in sharp, visible clouds, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't just some forgotten storage room. It was something more, something dark. I forced myself to focus. The room itself seemed untouched by time. No dust, no decay, yet the chill in the air was palpable, as if the very walls were alive with a past I didn't understand. The freezer in the middle of the room was much larger than the one where the girl had been found. It loomed ominously, as if inviting me to look closer, to see what had been hidden there. I couldn't resist. My curiosity was a beast I couldn't tame. Slowly, I approached the freezer and placed my hand on the cool metal. The surface was smooth, unblemished. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever I might find. With a grunt, I pulled the freezer door open. Inside, there was nothing but an eerie emptiness. But just as I started to feel the first flicker of relief, something caught my eye. A small, crumpled piece of paper sat at the bottom of the freezer. Hesitant but determined, I reached down and grabbed it.
A freezing cold is not enough. We must stop her before... I couldn't decipher the rest. But the implication was clear. Whoever had written this had been terrified. There was someone, or something, that was hunting them. And the references to freezing cold, it was as if they were talking about the very thing that had claimed the girl's life. I quickly stuffed the paper into my pocket. I had to get out of that room, but my mind was racing. The journal had provided more questions than answers, but it confirmed something I already suspected. This wasn't a simple case. There was something far darker at play here, and it was pulling me in deeper with each passing moment. As I left the room, I felt an intense sensation of being watched. My skin crawled, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone. I turned quickly, my heart pounding, but the hallway remained empty. The old building creaked and groaned, its structure settling under the weight of its own decay, but nothing else stirred. I made my way out of the back corridor and back into the main area of the restaurant. It looked the same, cold, lifeless, untouched, but somehow it felt different now. The shadows seemed deeper, more oppressive. I was no longer in control. The events surrounding the girl's death had unraveled something in me, and now I was too close to the truth to back away. Back outside, I tried to collect my thoughts. I needed to talk to someone. I needed more information, more pieces to the puzzle. But I couldn't trust the police. They had already written the girl off as just another cold case, a nameless victim in an empty restaurant. I needed someone who understood the darkness I was beginning to see. That's when I remembered the old man. I'd heard stories about him when I first started asking around about the restaurant. People described him as eccentric, living on the outskirts of the city in a run-down house surrounded by strange symbols and arcane objects. He was known for his odd behaviors and whispered about as someone who knew things about the supernatural, things that others were too afraid to acknowledge. His name was Vincent, and he was the only person who might know something about the symbols in the hidden room, about the freezing cold that seemed to haunt the girl's death, and about the dark forces I could feel closing in on me. I found his house just beyond the city limits. It was a ramshackle place, surrounded by a thick fog that made it appear almost unreal. The windows were boarded up, and a large iron gate guarded the entrance. I hesitated before knocking on the door, but something deep inside told me this was the only place that could give me answers. When Vincent opened the door, his appearance shocked me. His
Should have. You're the one investigating the girl in the freezer, aren't you? He said, without preamble. His voice was raspy, yet filled with an unsettling certainty. I've been waiting for you. My heart skipped a beat. How do you know about that? Vincent stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. I've been watching the restaurant. You're not the first to come looking, but you're the first who's gotten this far. Sit down. You'll want to hear this. I follow him inside, feeling a chill settle over me. The room was filled with strange symbols and occult objects, books on the supernatural, jars of unknown substances, and relics that gave off an eerie energy. I know what you found, he said, sitting down across from me. I know about the girl, and I know about the curse. The words hung heavy in the air. Curse? What do you mean? Vincent's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, he seemed to hesitate. There are things that are better left untouched, he said quietly. But you've already opened the door, haven't you? Now, there's no going back. He told me a story about the restaurant, about its owners, who had been involved in something far darker than anyone could imagine. He spoke of rituals, of sacrifices, and of the vengeful spirit of a girl who had been wronged and bound to the place by forces beyond comprehension. This girl you found, Vincent said, his voice lowering, was never meant to die. She was a pawn, a tool in a game that has been going on for centuries, and now the thing that controls her, whatever it is, has been awakened. I felt a chill race up my spine as his words sank in. There was something far more sinister at play than I had ever imagined.
The girl's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was part of something much larger, something I could hardly begin to understand. The shadows in the room seemed to grow longer as Vincent spoke, and I felt the oppressive weight of the dark forces he described pressing in on me. I had been drawn into this mystery, but now I realize it was more than I had ever bargained for. The curse that Vincent spoke of was real, and whatever it wasn't done with me yet. I had to find a way to stop it before it consumed me too. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the air thick with the weight of Vincent's words. I was no longer sure whether I was speaking with an eccentric old man, as if gauging my reaction, but I barely moved, too stunned to respond. The ritual began long ago with the original owners of the Silver Plate restaurant, he continued. They were part of a secret society, a group obsessed with controlling death, with summoning spirits and bending them to their will. But something went wrong. Something went terribly wrong. Vincent's gaze turned distant, as though he was seeing a memory play out in front of him. The girl you found wasn't just a victim. She was chosen, but not in the way you think. She was meant to be a conduit, a bridge between the living and the dead. But the ritual went awry. The spirit they were trying to summon, something older, more powerful, didn't arrive as they expected. Instead, it became trapped in her. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "So you're saying she was possessed?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vincent nodded grimly. "Yes, and worse. She became the vessel for something malevolent, something that had no intention of staying in her. It twisted her, corrupted her, and when she died, the spirit, it didn't leave. It stayed, bound to the place. The restaurant became a prison, and her body, her death, was only the beginning." A cold shiver ran down my spine as the realization hit me. The girl wasn't just a victim of human cruelty. She had been the focus of something far darker. She was the unwilling vessel for an entity that had been trapped in the very walls of the restaurant for decades. Her death was not an end. It was a release, a rebirth. "But why was she in the freezer? Why did they hide her?" I asked, trying to piece it together. It didn't make sense. If the curse was as powerful as Vincent said, why keep the body hidden away? Vincent's eyes darkened. The freezer, it's not just a hiding place, it's a containment unit. The cold was meant to slow the spirit's influence, to keep it from escaping. But it was never meant to be a permanent solution. Over time, the spirit grew stronger, more restless, and that's why she was found. She was meant to be a sacrifice, but she had been kept alive longer than they intended. Her body was just a shell, but the spirit, the thing trapped inside, was growing more powerful with each passing day. I took a step back, trying to absorb the weight of what Vincent was saying. It felt unreal, like a story from a nightmare, but I could no longer deny it. The pieces fit together. The girl's body, the strange symbols, the feeling of being watched, it all made sense now. The curse had not ended with her death. It had only just begun. "Vincent, what do I do? How do I stop it?" My voice trembled, but I couldn't stop myself from asking. I had to know. This was bigger than anything I had ever encountered, and if I didn't act, I could be the next victim. Vincent stared at me, his face grim. "You've already made a mistake by coming here," he said softly. "The curse is already aware of you. It's been following you since you stepped foot in that restaurant. It's not going to let you go, not until it has what it wants." I froze, my blood running cold. "What does it want?" I asked, barely able to form the words. "The same thing it's always wanted," Vincent whispered. "A soul. Yours." His words hung in the air like a death sentence. I staggered back, the reality of what I was facing crashing down on me. I wasn't just investigating a murder anymore. I was up against something far older, far more dangerous than I could have imagined. Vincent stood up, his frail figure suddenly seeming more imposing. "There's no escape from this,"
he said, his voice low but filled with finality. "You're already marked. The spirit is awake, and it knows you're here. The longer you stay, the more power it gains. You have to finish what you started, or it will consume you." "Finish what I started?" I repeated, my mind spinning. "What are you talking about? How do I stop it?" Vincent's eyes glinted with a strange mixture of pity and sorrow. "You must confront it. The spirit needs to be put to rest. You have to go back to the restaurant, to the place where it all began. You must perform the ritual, reverse it, free the girl's soul, and destroy the thing that has taken over her body." I felt my legs weaken. This was madness. There was no way I could confront something like that. But Vincent's face was unrelenting. He wasn't telling me to run or hide. He was telling me to face it head on. "If you don't," he said softly, "it will follow you. It will drag you down into the darkness, and once it has you, it won't let you go." I was trapped. There was no other choice. The only way to escape was to end it. But how could I do something like that? How could I face the thing that had killed the girl and was now coming for me? I had no answers. Only one thing was certain now. I had to go back to the restaurant, to the place where the curse had begun. I stood there in Vincent's cluttered room, my mind a whirlwind of terror and confusion. The weight of his words pressed down on me like a suffocating fog. I had come to this place for answers, but now I was tangled in a nightmare I wasn't prepared for. The curse, the spirit, the girl in the freezer, everything had been leading to this moment, this final confrontation. I could no longer deny it. I had to go back to the restaurant. But as I stood there, the thought of facing that malevolent entity filled me with a sense of hopelessness. Vincent's voice broke through my thoughts, cold and resolute. "You're running out of time. The longer you wait, the stronger it becomes. You're already marked by it. It will—"
Mine screamed for me to run, to escape, to forget this whole damn thing. But deep down, I knew there was no escaping it. It was already too late. Vincent must have seen the fear in my eyes because he stepped closer, his voice softer now. "It's not just about confronting the spirit. It's about freeing the girl. She's been trapped for so long. You have to release her from the curse, or she'll be bound forever, and the spirit will continue to feed on the souls of the innocent." I swallowed hard. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy with the inevitability of what had to come. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about her, the girl who had been a pawn in this twisted ritual. She had been trapped in a nightmare for far too long. If I didn't act, it would continue. The spirit would consume her, and it would find new victims, just like me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "How do I do it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How do I stop it?" Vincent gave a slow nod. "Go to the restaurant. You must find the altar, the source of the power that binds the spirit to this place. The freezer, it was part of the ritual. But the altar is where the true power lies. Destroy it, and you'll destroy the curse. But be warned, the spirit won't go without a fight." The finality of his words hit me like a blow to the chest. I could no longer hesitate. I had to end this. I had no choice. I turned and made my way out of Vincent's house, the fog still thick around me, as though the world itself was closing in. The streets felt empty, deserted, as I walked toward the restaurant. Every step was heavier than the last, but I pushed forward, driven by the weight of what had to be done. As I approached the restaurant, the familiar feeling of dread crept over me once more. The building loomed in front of me, its decaying walls now appearing more like a prison than a forgotten eatery. The air was still, too still. I could feel the presence of the spirit, lurking just out of sight, watching me. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The restaurant had an eerie silence about it, a sense of abandonment that no longer felt safe. It felt like a tomb. I moved cautiously through the darkened halls, the memories of the girl's death, her body frozen in the cold, echoing in my mind. I made my way to the back of the building, where the hidden room had been. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping with every step.
Racing. The girl's gaze met mine, but it wasn't her eyes that I saw. It was the spirit, the malevolent force that had consumed her. A voice, low and raspy, echoed through my mind. "You should have stayed away." The ground beneath me seemed to shift, and I realized, too late, that the spirit wasn't going to let me leave. The room darkened, the shadows twisting and stretching like living things. The air grew thick with a power I couldn't comprehend. But I couldn't turn back now. I had to destroy the altar. I lunged forward, grabbing the nearest object, a heavy stone off the ground, and smashing it into the altar. The room shook violently as the stone cracked the surface. The spirit howled, its fury filling the air. The girl's body writhed in agony, her mouth opening in a silent scream. I swung the stone again, each strike breaking the altar, each one weakening the spirit's hold. The girl's body convulsed as the power within her began to unravel. The room grew colder, and the shadowy presence seemed to falter, just for a moment. And then, with one final blow, the altar shattered. The room went deathly quiet. The oppressive darkness lifted, and for the first time since I arrived, I felt like I could breathe. The spirit's presence had vanished. The girl, now free, lay motionless on the floor, her body no longer twisted by the curse, but finally at peace. I collapsed to the ground, exhaustion flooding over me. It was over. The curse had been broken. But as I sat there in the silence of the restaurant, a question lingered in my mind. Had I truly freed her, or had I only delayed the inevitable? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stay in this place any longer. I stood up, glancing one last time at the shattered altar and the still body of the girl. The restaurant had claimed enough lives. It was time to leave it behind. Forever. I walked out into the cold night, the fog swirling around me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace, though I knew that the darkness, the curse, would always linger in the back of my mind, waiting to claim its next victim.